I'm Patrick Heffernan, one of the principal analysts at Technology Research, and we're doing a roundtable again on COVID-19 and the impacts that we're seeing across the IT services, cloud, infrastructure, data center, IoT, devices space, everything that has to do with the business of doing technology, and what the impact of this pandemic has been. This is our fifth roundtable, and I'm joined again today by Geoff Woollacott, Ezra Gottheil, and Allan Krans to talk about the different areas that we're focused on and changes that we're starting to see as this pandemic, hopefully, I'm sitting in Massachusetts on April 23rd. It feels like it's still March. Hopefully we've hit the peak and we're starting to come down the other side, but we'll see. So with that, I'll turn it over first to Allan.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, so we've been kind of speculating on what the financial impacts are of the COVID-19 virus. Up until this point, we've been having some customer conversations and getting anecdotal feedback from some of the vendors in terms of what they're seeing. But really, this week, we just started to begin to see hard financial data coming out as the first of kind of the big firms in my coverage area reported SAP and IBM, their first quarter earnings, and it gave us a glimpse into what we can expect for other vendors, as well as what the duration and kind of timing of some of these impacts. So when we look at those two vendors that reported, a couple things really kind of stand out in terms of key takeaways. First was that any business that's transactional, that depends on an immediate order to recognize revenue in that period or in that quarter or month, those are the businesses that were first hit. It was business as usual pretty much up until the middle of February. But at that time, you really started to see more spread of the virus, more starting to shut down in terms of some of the European economies. And then eventually, as we got into March, obviously, those impacts spilled over into the United States. And so with that, you had customers really kind of freeze a lot of existing projects. And you saw that in terms of, for IBM and SAP, the software licensing business was really the hardest hit for both of them. And not only is that a transactional business, but it has a flow of closing a lot of your deals right at quarter's end. So right at the end of March, when the impacts were really the most severe in terms of the first quarter, a lot of those deals were stalled, or the vendors hope they're stalled at this point. So you start to see an immediate slowdown in terms of those businesses. So really any company that going into the first, second, and third quarters has a lot of that transactional license and even hardware revenue, those are the things that are going to see the most impact. Now, on the other side of the coin, all of the major software vendors, IBM, SAP, and Oracle, so we have a glimpse of their earnings, have more revenue from annuity sources now than they have in the past. A lot of that comes from cloud, but you also have things like term licenses where you have customers committing up front to longer term contracts, paying up front, and then that revenue is just pulled off the balance sheet and recognized each quarter. And so that's obviously a great thing when you have disruption now where those businesses continued pretty much as normal. Although there were the deal flow for future business, SAP noted that their cloud sales transactions, commitments from customers for those contracts looked pretty much like their software licensing business, down pretty significantly, but that the impact of those deals won't show up in terms of the revenue recognition for months, quarters, and years to come. So at least for now, annuity businesses are pretty strong. So any company going in there with a bigger annuity mix is going to be a benefit for them, at least in the short term, although obviously delayed deals today will eventually impact revenue later on. Two more things to kind of note that we saw. Both IBM and SAP with pretty strong financial positions, good balance sheets, expect to continue their investment even during this disruption and slowdown in their customer spending. I think they see it as an opportunity to keep pace and continue to innovate with the expectation that once the economy gets back to normal and their customers are in more normal spending patterns, that that'll be a longer term advantage for them. So it'll be interesting to see for some of the less stable, less established firms, if they're able to continue that same strategy, or if they're going to have to pull back a little bit more to preserve profit as they go through this disruption. And then lastly, and Geoff will expand upon this when he chimes in, but both vendors noted about 95% of their workforce is shifted to remote. Now both companies had a pretty significant base previously, but obviously 95%, that's near all of their employees, except for a few that really have to be on site, have shifted to remote. And so the biggest implication of that is the go-to-market strategy. Both firms, as well as a lot of the other cloud, even pure cloud providers, Salesforce and Workday, for instance, do a lot of face-to-face selling, a lot of travel, a lot of expense reimbursement for the salespeople. All of that activity has come to a halt. And so you've seen them shift out of necessity to a more digital, remote type go-to-market strategy. SAP noted that they had a digital sales team, almost entirely digital, for their commercial accounts to cover those accounts, the smaller accounts, and that they've taken a lot of those tools and processes and rolled them out to the entirety of their sales force in reaction to this shift to a stay-at-home remote work type environment. IBM also noted for a lot of their services engagements, being able to shift to a remote delivery wherever possible is how they expect to continue to engage in projects and meet milestones and continue that business, even if they're not having people on site and doing consulting or services on customer site, because obviously that's not possible, at least for the next couple of months in all reality. So there has been this shift both on the sales and delivery side to being able to deliver some of those things remotely. Again, these are some of the more larger established vendors. Obviously, it's more difficult to implement change, but for some of the smaller firms, they may not have the level of support and resources to pull off such a dramatic shift and be as effective with it. So we'll look at that. Every vendor is going to deal with it, and Geoff will go through a little bit, other implications that has for the traditional sales models. So that's what we know so far on the cloud and software side. I'll hand it off to Ezra for his commentary.
Thank you, Allan. And I cover devices, mainly PCs, and also IoT. We're getting confirmation of the kinds of things we thought were probably happening. We haven't had any earnings reports, but we've got confirmations from reports from other kinds of sources, including company representatives speaking about what they're doing. What looks like the overall texture of the market, the PC market in the first quarter, was that demand was up quite a bit as people tried to outfit their work from home and remote work environments, often needing to add the number of computing devices in a household and things like that. So demand was up, but supply was deeply affected by the interference in the supply chain in China, and that was compounded by the ongoing shortage of the higher end Intel CPUs. So basically, shipments are down quite a bit, and I assume that it's not only the supply chain but the logistics and delivery chain that also interfered with that. Right now, the PC vendors are enjoying an urgency to order and get products. They've gone on an allocation mode. One of them, Lenovo spoke about needing to prioritize healthcare institutions and things like that and getting their PCs out. I'm sure that is what the other vendors are also doing, but they've got a lot of pent-up demand to fill. We do not think that trend is going to continue for very long because of the recession. We think that a lot of work PCs are going to be taken out of service and repurposed elsewhere, and that we're looking at slump in demand as well as a problem with supply. Lenovo has said that their supply chain is back up and running. They were hit moderately. Apple was hit hardest with a almost totally China-based. It has other countries contributing, but with an offshore supply chain to a large extent. And Dell was hit least. It has a more diversified supply chain. One of the things all the vendors are doing is trying to help keep their customers up and running and using their goods. So there are changes in payment plans and arrangements to turn ownership into leases, ways of helping their customers get through a difficult period in their businesses and still keep using the tools they need. All three vendors are also trying to help their partners, as is typical with them. HP has got the most well-defined partner assistance program, followed by Lenovo, and Dell has only made announcements recently where they have modified their partnering program to help their partners get through this very rough period. So the overall picture is what we thought we would see: an increase in demand, constrained by a supply chain problems, but the demand we still expect will decrease as the recession hits hard. There have been a couple of announcements that came up during this time, and they interact with the COVID. Both of them have come out of Apple. The $395 SE phone has the same processor as their $1,200 top-end processor. It looks like the only real what the customer gives up is largely in the camera, as people are facing a need to replace their iPhones and or smartphones of any type, and they see the ability to get a really high-performing Apple iPhone for $400. We think that that's going to be a good seller. Apple has also finally broken through and made it official that the accessory keyboard has a touchpad for the iPad Pro. This is kind of significant because the iPad Pro is Apple's approach to simplified computing. They want the iPad Pro to be a substitute for a PC, not an adjunct, and that lack of a touchpad had been one of the problems. So I think we see a situation where the iPad Pro joins in the mix for people who want powerful, usable computers that are somewhat less complicated than full-fledged Windows machines. I also cover IoT, and it is hard to know exactly what's going on with IoT because companies do not tend to report on that. IoT has now been thoroughly embedded in their digital transformation strategies and the digital transformation sales processes. But what we believe is going on is right now, IoT deployments are very limited by limited physical access, but that owners of IoT are continuing to use their data streams and seeking to leverage them more effectively. Going forward, IoT, like everything else, will suffer from a global recession as customer companies cut back on their expenses. However, IoT, point product IoT focused at specific goals can be money saving. And as companies invest in appropriate digital transformation technologies to help deal with a more difficult economic picture, IoT goes into that bucket. So we see the COVID crisis accelerating the adoption of IoT, but within the constraints of a greatly slowed global economy. I will hand it off now to Geoff Woollacott to talk about data center and other things. Geoff?
And we hope Jeff's there. If he is, he's still on mute. And that's what happens.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, the 1Q20, I listened to the SAP and IBM results as Allan did. A lot of it rolled as expected in terms of the license to and transaction shifts. A couple of surprises or things that kind of gave me the RCA dog look was one, for IBM, cognitive was down, and they attributed it to a lot of the cognitive deals being transformation deals and that they had been stalled. Now, and another thing there is, as we well know, certain industries are getting clobbered harder than others. You know, hospitality, travel, et cetera, is obviously hurt more than other things. So if it was a transformation deal in one of those, retail or something, I can understand why it went down. But if it was stalled by a business decision maker because of getting a case of the yips in this environment, I'd say it was a bad move. Because now would be the time to start that transformation as your overall business volume is down, and you therefore have more time from your labor pool for the training and skills development that is going to need to be used for the new digital technology. So that's one I want to take a sort of watch a little bit. Second one is the lag is to look next quarter at book to bill and the services base, because they've got the pipeline and the backlog. IBM said 80% of GBS and 90% of GTS comes out of the booked business for each quarter. So they're okay from that perspective. Their book to bill was, pretty much the same. I think backlog was up a point in GBS and down a couple in GTS. So looking at that next quarter will be interesting for those large engagements. And then the other pieces that I was thinking of, there was the commonality of selling becoming more virtual, and also the need for more sort of technical advice up front. And this is a prevailing trend where the blue suit salesman, in the blog I wrote, is COVID the death of a salesman? Is that traditional affable blue suit salesman is not as critical to the engagements anymore as they used to be, unless they are able to do consultative selling. So the large enterprise sellers probably have that, but when you move into late majority enterprises, which are typically smaller, and the selling organizations that are going after that, which are typically resellers that are more legacy, this is a place where share shift could be going on. And the reason I say that, I also summoned up this book from a decade ago that was a tough slog back then called Thinking Fast and Slow, where basically most of the time you're working from muscle memory. You're thinking fast. You've decided what you need, and you're just going out and you're ordering more of whatever it is you decided on in the past. In thinking slow, when there's been some sort of major event, you're being more deliberate. This is where consultative selling can come in and help, number one. But number two, you're sort of setting yourself up, thinking through a lot of things so you can get at it at a later time. And if that seller is quick to just give you something that may work in the short term, like you need more network for the telework that's been going on, and they sell you something or they convince you to get into SD-WAN, and they haven't talked you through what the security implications are and all these other things. They took the order rather than giving you a consultative discussion of the implications of what you were doing. It could blow up in their faces, resulting in a change in alliances or a change in the supplier. So this period of time could see a rearranging of the market share, depending on how well the sellers do when they're probably frantic to try to make quota. But what they should be doing is slowing down and really working with the account. So that's something that isn't necessarily showing up in the financials, but in terms of SAP and IBM calling it out as this move to virtual selling, it kind of triggered it in my head as something that I want to sort of take a look at or consider. And with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Excellent, thanks. And it's that last point where I think we might disagree a little bit, and I only say that because I know from experience of working with a lot of the IT systems or the IT systems integrators and those large IT services vendors who have tried to become more consultative, who have tried to get their sales force to work in a more consultative manner, who've actually gone out in some cases and acquired consulting assets and tried to sort of bolt them onto sort of a typical IT services. And it's enormously difficult. There's a huge I don't disagree, Geoff, it's got to happen. I just think there's a massive cultural shift that has to happen. And it's been so hard to do in the past. I'm not sure it's going to be possible. Definitely not in the near future. Another thing that you brought up in the blog, I want to point out, you mentioned will people will people stop going to, obviously they're not now, but will people stop going to those experience centers or design centers or the innovation labs and that kind of thing? And, while those could be looked at right now as kind of a sunk cost and maybe a little bit of a disadvantage because they're beautiful facilities that are sitting empty at the moment, I do think as soon as we can go back to visiting those places, people are going to want to go back and going to crave that sort of human interaction and that on-site, in-person, give me a chance to really, get into the weeds on this with you in person. I think it's going to actually be a resurgence in that. So I think while it's a lot of cost to be paying right now in real estate that can't be used, and in beautiful facilities that can't be used, I think what's going to happen when we can go back to it is we're going to want to go back to it. And then I want to make one other point. What we're seeing in the IT services space and in the consulting space is just now, even, towards the end of April, and what is this, like 6-8 weeks, however many weeks it is into this pandemic here in the US, we're starting to begin to have those conversations about what things look like on the other side and what kinds of new offerings, what kinds of new services, what kinds of new initiatives that were on the drawing board in February and January and February, but have been on pause since then. Now, a lot of these vendors and these consultancies are asking us and are thinking about, okay, how is the timing going to work out here? How soon can I roll this out? How many months do I need to wait? What does our marketing campaign need to look like? What's going to be the appetite for stuff that's new as opposed to the appetite for, just help me make sure that my IT continues to function and make sure that I can continue to work remote and support my people. So it's curious that it hasn't, I think if we had this conversation, when we had this conversation a month ago, and we talked about timing, I think we were all, there were a lot of unknowns. I think we're getting a little bit more comfortable with knowing what those unknowns are and how the timing will start to work out a little bit more in favor of those companies that, as we've all been talking, are better positioned. Geoff, I don't know if you wanted one last sort of shot at whether I was right or wrong on my critiques there.
No, I don't really disagree with it for the large enterprise. In my head, as I was thinking through the sort of consultative seller versus the transactional, I was thinking of the distributor or the VAR that maybe has been trying to move over to managed services, and that transaction territory rep that may not want to delay the sales cycle because he's eager to get something closed and he won't bring in the SME. He'll just, place the order, and then it gets out there and it screws up the environment for the mid-market company. And then on the design centers, it was Arvind Krishna who brought it up, talking about virtual garages, and that he was able to get everybody around the globe, which led me to think of 9/11 and how web conferencing got there. But then secondarily was for the GSIs, they really haven't gone to, the non-NFL cities, the second tier cities, because of travel. And this is a way to extend the reach down virtually to that sort of, I'll call it the underserved market for those types of services. But, for the big engagements, yeah, they'll still be around. But the question is, how much more could you scale out from a virtual environment, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's...
Yeah, that does make sense. I think part of it then comes back to what Ezra was talking about, is how rapidly can the device manufacturers, can the companies that are providing actual hardware, how fast can they meet that shift in demand?
Yep, and we're all just getting more comfortable with it. I mean, look at us. We've been fiddling around with 3 different video conferencing platforms within TBR. So we're all getting a little better at it, says the guy who left it on mute when he had to talk. But that we're all getting more familiar with these things.
I had 4 meetings to start my day, and then we're on 4 different conferencing platforms. So we're used to it, but it's a challenge. Ezra and Allan, any other last thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think you guys have covered it. Geoff, that book Thinking Fast and Slow is awesome, but you really get the gist in the first 50 pages. You don't have to go through every cognitive psych experiment that this Nobel laureate has ever done. Really,
I know.
All right. Well, on that note, Allan, anything else?
No, nothing else for me. I'm just excited to see more, or interested to see more of the earnings come out next week and really start to dig into the financial impact.
Excellent. So, all right, gentlemen, the next time we do this, the challenge is now on the table that you'll need to bring forward a book that is better than just the first 50 pages. For the next roundtable. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.